I always do that. It's just, oh, everybody's going to think, what is he hiding? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you're not missing anything. I always laugh before I start my videos anyways. So I'm here again with my esteemed colleague, or he's mine or I'm his or something. Ron Nielsen, he is the author of The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. And the link will be in the description box in the bottom of this video. We're asking you to, like and share, and the thing, as Biden says,
The thing.
to help people understand about the history of federal lands. And we're going to be going through the book step by step, video by video, page by page, to help people to understand the issue a little bit better. We recognize some people just can't read, won't read, don't have time to read, whatever. The videos will be an accompaniment to that. We do take questions in your comment section, or in our comment section. So if you have any questions, feel free to do that. You can contact Ron directly on his website. Again, the link is in the description box. This is a third video. We're going to start from page 9. Oh, I wanted to be able to mention too. So in an effort to be, if we do things the way I hope that we do, we will continue to do videos, 45 minutes an hour, something like that, as we graduate through the book. The other thing is from time to time we'll go off on little tangents, like we did yesterday, where we will talk about the federal lands issue. As it deals with current events, to help bring real life situations into the historical context. So, or historical and legal and political context, I guess I should say. So, so in the previous video, I'm just going to do a brief review of what we did in video 2, where we were talking about, I asked Ron to be able to define exactly what forms of government that we were dealing with at the time so that we could better understand exactly how everything comes into play. So he was talking about the Articles of Confederation and the creation at 1777. We were talking about when the Articles of Confederation were replaced by the Constitution, and the importance of the Northwest Ordinance that was actually created during the time of the Articles of Confederation, and actually while the Constitution, it seems like, was just getting off the ground as well. So if you're interested in that, to be able to set the proper stage for that, you can go through and watch video 2 of that. Of course, video 1 is the overview book of the book in itself. So if you needed information for that, go ahead and go to video 2. Let's see. I think where I was going with that was, I got too many notes here, man. Okay. So we're going to start where we left off at page 9, and then at the end of the video, around I don't know, maybe 150 or so, we'll end up doing some questions that I took. That the design of the questions really is to be able to help people. Maybe I'm hoping to ask questions that the people, the readers, and the listeners will be asking along the way, so that we can do a little bit of work preemptively, so they won't have to ask the questions. So we on page 9, I had in my notes, we were talking about the difference between the Confederacy, which I wrote was the plurality of states, the drafting agreement, the Articles of Confederation, the constitutional agreement with the United States. Now jump in where you feel like you have to here, Ron, but on the side notes, we talked about the fact that we needed a process for the land disposal program. Um, there was a resolution created on public lands, where it says that, and then the confusing part was where the states agreed to cede lands to the United States.
Do we solve that? Because that was I don't think a lot of people really understand that. There's some books that are written on it.
Okay.
But basically, just to rehash that really quick so that we're on good equal footing here. And before I get into that, Tom, I want to thank you for hosting these videos to get this book into a more a less condensed, because it's very information dense in the book, and I wrote it that way. But at least here we can unpack a lot of this density and sort of help it be a lot more understandable. I want to thank you for that. Okay, I think it'll be really critical moving forward for the nation.
Nice.
Okay, so
Thank you.
all right, going back to the issue of the states having claims to the land, right? So you had these you had these, all of the 13 states, almost all of them. I don't, maybe not every single one of them, but most of them, probably like 10 states or so, had claims to the Northwest properties. And so the government had to deliberate and solve those. And of course, South Carolina properties were big in this because they didn't get solved until after the Northwest Ordinance was adopted. That was still an ongoing dispute in the South Carolina properties. That's why we have a North and a South Ordinance. That's the reason for it.
Okay, so
So all of
let's say
those
that let's
claims
say
had to
that one
be
more
settled.
let's say that one more time. If everybody else understands it, then I'm a little behind the block. So tell me that again.
Okay,
So
so you had the
it,
Northwest properties
okay,
where all these
first
states have these dispute over. Go ahead.
talk to the hand. No. So the first question I had is this reference to words. Words mean things. They can easily, skew the dialogue. So I want to try to keep some consistency here.
Okay.
So we had talked previously about districts where you use the capital D. You use territories, Northwest territories, Southern territories. Now you're using the word properties. Is your word property, does that mean something different than what we've been talking about? Does this sort of define, is this another word for territories? How are you defining properties here?
Okay. I want to first of all apologize for using the term properties. I shouldn't use it until later on in our videos. It becomes
Okay.
relevant later. It's not relevant in the time frame that we're discussing it. So I
Okay.
shouldn't use it. So good catch. So I'm only going to use the term territory
Okay.
from here on out. All right.
Okay.
So okay, so the territory in the Northwest territory, the Northwest Ordinance was crafted um to distribute or to implement the United States government's land program in the
Hmm.
Northwest territories around the Great Lakes. Those territories there were disputes from a lot of the other states on those territories,
Hmm.
on those territories, and the whole thing, like sections of it.
Hmm.
So the government had to deliberate and they had to resolve those claims from the states to those territories in order for the government to carve out states out of them and to implement its land program.
Okay. Okay. I'm not looking at you. I'm taking notes. Okay.
I think that's pretty much all I can go as far as explaining that much of it. And we can go a little bit further and say, well, so the Southwest Ordinance, because those territories didn't get resolved in order for the Northwest Ordinance territories to be applied to them. Okay, so now something very interesting comes up here, right? So now that I brought this up, we have to tackle it.
Mm.
So are you telling me, Ron, that the Northwest Territory legislation only applied to the areas around the Great Lakes? And to that, I would say to you, sir, that is 100% accurate. So if the United States government acquired territory outside of that arrangement, they would have to do something different.
Wow. Okay. That seems good enough to me. So just for clarification purposes, we talk about the most patriots, students of the Constitution in our history understand the Northwest Ordinance. Like I said, most people thought it was a form of government at the time. Um, but you mentioned the word Southwest Ordinance. Now, I know what that is because I've read your book, but I would venture to say that not too many people, if anyone that we would talk to, is aware of this. And I asked you this question before, and I think it's worthwhile bringing it up today. There's a process to be able to implement things like enabling acts, things of that nature. And so the Northwest Ordinance was created through some type of a process. But how was the Southwest Ordinance created, and is that as much of a thing as the Northwest Ordinance is?
It's a good question. Solid
And
question. All right. So I think the best way to look at the Southwest Ordinance is an addendum to the Northwest Ordinance. Because remember earlier when I said that the Southwest properties that were under dispute properties. Again, I got to quit saying that. Territories, the Southwest territories. So we're talking Oklahoma and, you know, Alabama and all these territories down here that were being claimed by the states, right? South Carolina was in that.
Mm-hmm.
So the dispute didn't get settled for those territories by the time the Northwest Territory legislation got drafted. So they had to leave the Southwest Territories out of it until later. So after after there was a settling of the dispute over the territory in the South region of the country, the United States government passed the Southwest Ordinance. And when it passed the Southwest Ordinance, it created another territorial government. It had a governor, it had a legislature, and it had a judiciary, separate from the Northwest Ordinance government.
But the commander-in-chief of the militia was only in the Northwest Ordinance.
That's where they ran into a bump. You see, they go, well, we can't create another commander-in-chief. So what Arthur St. Clair had to do is he had to oversee with his military might both governments.
So essentially, this is fantastic. I just get so excited. I don't even know why when I'm talking about this, because we're talking about, oh, the federal government's out of its authority and this kind of thing, and people don't even realize what was going on back then. So you could essentially say that the Articles of Confederation was a what did you call it? A friendship?
It was a league of friendship between the states.
Okay. It was not a governing document.
No, the style of the government was not called
right.
The Confederacy. The style of the government was called the United States of America.
Right.
That was the government.
Okay. So that's important to know. So we had the Articles of Confederation. We had the Northwest Ordinance, which was a creation of a national government. We had the Constitution that was created, that was a formation of a national government. And we had the Southwest Ordinance, which was the formation of a national government. Is that correct?
That's right.
So we had three national governments going on at the same time, with, needless to say, conflicts of interest amongst the three, right?
Can you imagine why the United States government wouldn't want to go marketing that around?
And we think
to the United States citizenry,
and we think they're defunct now.
Right, exactly. So
like,
now
who wouldn't think that a conflict of interest of having two commander-in-chiefs wasn't going to be a problem?
Right. So you have the commander-in-chief power code. So this is what we do now. What we do is we create something called a delegation of federal authority, meaning that there's a power of a branch of government that we outsource to another person or group of people.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we create administrative agencies. Mm-hmm. It was first done in the Northwest Ordinance.
Okay.
The Article 2 delegation of federal authority, the commander-in-chief power, was the first case of a delegation of federal authority in the history of the United States.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you go back to the Northwest Ordinance that was, we would say, properly created, and the Southwest Ordinance was merely created by an addendum, would it be safe to say then that if something was lawfully created, that the federal government could just create an addendum just to be able to expand its federal authority?
Well, you get your finger on the pulse here. The use of the government's territorial jurisdiction has historically allowed that kind of behavior. The Constitution doesn't allow it. But this is extra constitutional. It doesn't exist in the
Let's talk about that. Let's really come back to that, because I think people need to break it. Whew, that complex, in the head. So when we talk about terms, like, you hear it all the time, right? It's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. I used to do that all the time. It's unconstitutional. It's not there. It's unconstitutional. Well, if something that they're doing is not in the Constitution, it makes it extra constitutional, right?
Yep.
So if they're abusing the powers that have been given to them, you would say that are sort of articulated? Let's say the Second Amendment, for example, right? Or, some other provision in there where the federal government has abused those particular articles or amendments, those would be constitutional. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a good enough, an accurate enough way to define
I
the
think for
difference?
now, yeah,
Okay.
at this level,
Okay.
it's a decent enough way to look at it.
Okay.
When
Okay.
you get into the extra there's an addendum to that. I want to slap an addendum on you, and that would just be this: that when you get into the extra constitutional, let's just call it a language, right? Let's put some quotation marks there. When you get into the extra constitutional side of this, the question always has to be asked: if the exercise of the power of the government falls within the acceptable parameters of the exercise of that power,
Mhm.
and let's say we're just talking domestically, okay, because they can exercise this power outside the United States virtually with no restriction. So let's just talk domestically, because that's what we're concerned about. We need to know, are they exercising that power domestically in a manner that's consistent with the land program's intention?
I see. Okay. So we're still on page 9. But I think we're laying some good groundwork that I think, I think is good. So we're talking about the creation of territories. We got that. The disposal program was necessary. Um, you mentioned something about issues with equal footing. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the issues that later on came out of everything that we're talking about here, where you have extra constitutional situation, the government operating extra constitutionally, you have you have these powers being exercised that are not controlled by the Constitution because they're not under congressional control. They're only under the commander in chief power of the executive branch. Um, One of the things that downstream came up from this, when the states start going, okay, well, wait a minute, looks like inside of our borders, you're applying a power here that we don't understand. How are you doing that? Because we thought we were on equal footing. So this went into the federal court system, and they started having this equal footing dispute. And the federal court system, the federal courts, the Supreme Court of the United States says, well, yeah, there's equal footing, but you got to understand something. There's the government's territorial power, right? So the federal courts have done a good job of doing two things: sidestepping a direct challenge to the territorial power of the government, and trying to make the dispute about something other than the government's territorial power, the exercise of it domestically. So the federal courts, that's what they've been trying to do.
So it seems like some things just don't ever change.
Right?
It's like this is not new, guys. It's like, oh, here we go. Same old thing, right? Nothing is new under the sun or whatever about something
Well,
else.
the problem here, Tom, ultimately is that the states, as of right now, and even when the equal footing doctrine became a dispute in the federal courts, from then till now, the government's like, okay, so here, I'll say it this way. Instead of getting into that, let me do it this way. When this issue came up to the federal court in 1901, the Supreme Court of the United States was stunned to find out that the government had a territorial jurisdiction it was operating domestically. Stunned. Couldn't believe when the government was relating the history of its land program to the government in arguments at bar, couldn't believe what they were hearing.
Right. Okay. So now we have to go back. We're definition of terms. Uh, issues at bar, please.
That means when there's a legal dispute and two parties are making argument in front of bar.
Okay, we just lost that whole section.
Okay, let me say it again. So the whole idea of at bar is two parties make an oral argument to a judge.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm just taking notes. Okay. So
Okay.
you talk about the issues with equal footing and then you move into tax revenues. So are those two issues related? And if they are, how?
Um,
You can
well, they
refer to the
can
book if
be.
you have to. Well, because you
Yeah,
said
they can be. But
so it said that the remuneration to the indebted states when they decided to dispose of the land via sale, that they would carve new states out of the Northwest Territories. New state additions would subsequently also increase tax revenues. Now, that's kind of important for us to be able to understand as far as building our economy from scratch, right?
boy, you just opened up a major can, my friend. Okay,
I'm
this
really
one's
good
going to take.
at I was born that way.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
So
you.
this one's going to take a while. Okay,
Okay. Well,
and
sorry about that.
you can
Do we need
easily
to do this
see that.
separate? Never mind. Go
Well,
ahead.
that's up. That's up to you. But I'm just going to go and
We're doing a
if you stop
chronological
me, you stop.
timeline here. Let's just do it. Try to nail it.
The United States commercial system cannot be construed as being seen as an organic system from the intention of the Constitution, absent the issue of the federal lands. And here's why: we were broke. We were broke. So when we acquired the right to the territory from England, the very first thing that we thought of, and you can see this in the debates, in the Constitutional Convention debates,
Mhm.
the thing that everyone was talking about was how broke we were and where we needed to make money. And they were counting on the territories to be a revenue generator.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, it wasn't just enough to sell the property, the territory. Wasn't just enough to sell parcels to US citizens. It wasn't enough for that. What they needed was they needed to entice the American people into purchasing territory, making it property, so that they could create their own commercial, so they can engage in commercial activity in the United States.
So they
So
were
the
actually,
entire,
go ahead.
yeah, so the entire federal land program had a myriad of different factors, but it was really, we need to create a commercial system here. So we need to sell the land and make some money quickly, but for the hope that it's going to be a residual amount of money made over time out of that initial sale.
Wow.
The entire United States commercial system was built on the land program.
Farm land program. That's a that is a piece that I think is vital to the complete puzzle.
Yeah,
So
it
so
is.
so did you need to continue or should I continue?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so we talk about so you mentioned debt revenue on page 10. They established a budget constraint model. Feel free to interject anywhere you want. We have you were talking about land grants, land
Let's
ordinance
look at
of
the budget. Let's
1784.
look at the
Okay.
budget constraint model. What Harley Grubb is talking about in the budget constraint model was, okay, we needed to be able to have a system, or we need to be able to create the land disposal system in a manner that where the United States government can count on money coming in, tax revenues coming in, so that it could learn to create budgets and hold themselves to these budgets.
Okay.
Right. So that drove the entire commercial process of the United States government. And keep in mind, the only commerce that's going on at this time, if we're in 1787, is the 13 colonies. So they're about to increase the commercial activity of the United States by orders of magnitude simply with the land program.
Wow.
Okay. So that budget constraint model that he's talking about is a citizen purchasing land, building some kind of business on that land that feeds him and his families and contributes commercially.
And now it seems like they're doing everything they can to not only stop the to stop the economy, they're trying to be able to impose their control mechanisms on the very people that they were dependent on for that economy, which
The
means their money
people
must
who
be
have
coming from
control of
somewhere
the
else.
system, yeah, the people who have control of the land program now are reversing the intention of it.
Mhm.
They're going the opposite direction.
Yeah. Okay, so you
It
mentioned,
that one thing alone will destroy the United States as we know it.
and I would argue with what I know, it's intended to do that. So,
It is.
so you talk about land grants. I found land grants interesting. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so not everybody had the ability to purchase land. So the
Mhm.
United States realized, okay, got a lot of poor people up here. We want to lift these people up out of poverty and into prosperity. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a land grant system to give away portions of these lands to settlers, poor white settlers at the time, who will do exactly what we were talking about. Right. I mean, it's, I'm going to use the term because it's historically accurate. So, um, so they wanted these poor people to get in there and build these farms and build these ranches and lift themselves out of poverty. That was what the land program was. One of the things it was designed to do
So you mentioned
is
that
empower. Good.
this might be tongue in cheek, but hey, you can't keep it all serious. So you mentioned the word white and you mentioned the word poor in the same sentence. So you mean to tell me that there's poor people out there that are white?
Well,
Sorry.
don't let this get around. But if it ever gets found out, we might not get our cards, right? Our white privilege cards.
In South
So I'd hate to
Africa,
lose mine.
and South Africa is removing white farmers. Anyway, that's a whole
Yes.
different can of worms. Anyways, so a question about grants now. We talk about what the government was doing, and I laugh about it about how nothing's really changed. Well, here we have a program, right? The federal government, in all of its glory, it has since that time apparently decided that they want to be able to choose winners and losers, or what I would call winners and losers, where it actually decides to be able to say that we are going to be able to initiate some arbitrary rule that basically says that anybody that makes less than so on money is going to be able to get special favor um, uh, that the other people that make more than that don't get. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so because they wanted to help a certain lower class of a lower economic class of people, right?
So are you talking about now or back then?
No, it's obvious that they're doing it now. No, back then. Because some things just
Yeah.
don't
So
change. The federal
yes.
government gets
Yeah,
our money and they get our property and they say, hey, we're just going to go ahead and take theirs. We're going to go ahead and
yes.
choose who we're going to give property to. So
Yes.
do you,
The whole idea. Good.
so now we're running into a scenario where you could almost make an argument, right? So here we have these founders and their brilliant wisdom or the conspirators or whoever, and they're coming up with these ideas on how to be able to expand this government through this land disposal program to be able to create this nation and all of that. And one of the provisions you could almost argue that might have been necessary in an effort to be able to kickstart the economy by empowering people that were less fortunate to be able to do that. But it was at the cost of the federal government involving itself in creating two different classes of people. So, in your mind, do you think that this was a good thing, or do you think that this was a bad thing, or
Well,
neither?
in the early United States, there was no differentiation between classes of people.
Okay.
Right. The
Until,
early land. Yeah. So that came at the 14th Amendment. That's when we had to start classifying classes of people because the government was on a tear and it was trying to make corrections and it was overcorrecting and we I don't want to get into that. So okay, so the early land program. The early land program, they were just all that they were interested in doing is
kickstarting the economy.
equilibrating the mean economic level of the country, getting it up to a mean, now not through socialism, by just giving everybody the opportunity
Right. Right.
to try to all be at some standard level with each other.
Yeah.
So there's another aspect to this. in the government's, in the early government, in the program's intention, and the land program's intention, there was never any intention to give an abundant amount of property to the state. Never. When you look at the original land program around the Great Lakes, all of that land was slated first and foremost to be sold to United States citizens.
Oh my
The
gosh.
state, the state came much, much later down the list. The
So
very first person to receive land in the United States was the United States citizen.
that is absolutely, totally, and completely important.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that really just, well, and obviously you can kind of tell by the implementation of the land grant program, right? Because the land grant
Yes.
program just wasn't be able to give to that state. So that definitely makes your claim. So you talk about the land ordinance of 1784 and 1787. Do you care to talk about that a little bit?
Okay, so the initial land grants, it's just opportunities for people
Is that what that was?
to
Was that the articulation of the land grant program?
yeah.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
we don't need to
Mhm.
cover that.
There was a bunch of them. You had a
Okay.
lot of different land grab scenarios and sale of land scenarios, etc.
Is there a place where somebody can go to learn about those? Probably just type in land grants, something like that.
Uh, look up instead of land grants, look up uh, federal. Well,
And it doesn't really matter
there
if you
are
don't have it, but
it's there's a whole bunch of different they're homesteading acts, but not all of them are really just homesteading acts,
okay.
right? So the homesteading acts are really important here.
Mhm.
Um, but there are other acts that didn't involve homesteading, right? So
Right.
uh, I don't know how to answer that question. I'd have to give you a list of legislation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna do that. Okay. So then um, you were talking about a national survey team that was established to divide the government's property into sellable lots for disposal in every instance where the new land was acquired. I think we kind of hit that a little bit, unless you think that you need to expand on that.
Yeah, so just let me expand on that.
Okay.
If you want to understand what the federal government's land program was from the original moment till now, the best way to do that is through the survey teams. Let me tell you why. If everything I've just told you is accurate and that the federal government's intention was to sell land to United States citizens and everybody else came second or third or fifth down the list, then what you would expect to see is the entire United States divided up into sellable lots
Mhm.
from the survey team. Yes.
Yes.
Talk to a surveyor sometime. The entire, all the property ever, all the territory ever acquired by the United States government was surveyed into sellable lots. All of it.
I'm actually talking to a surveyor now as we speak. And we actually
All
know
of
one
it.
of those, don't we? Um,
Yep.
you said that there was some sort of, I wrote in the side notes there was a state's hesitation to claim land. Is there something that you think we need to know about that?
About the state's hesitation to claim land.
Yeah, unless I just manufactured that and put it there. Let's see. Oh, it was a breeding ground for human abuses on a massive scale. This shows up in the, let's see, Virginia hesitated to move to get the lands it had claimed against to be put up for public sale. The land fell into the hands of the prominent. Is that an important thing? I mean, it obviously
Yeah,
is.
it is important because,
Okay.
again, it shows the intention of the land program. The intention of the land program was not to have powerful factions control the disposition of the property.
Mm, right.
And so the best way to do that is to put the land up for sale to all United States citizens and not let the state and its factions get their hands on it.
Mm, that makes sense. Okay. Then you go into the AOS, the Articles of Confederation being inadequate. I think we know that already, unless there's anything you feel like you need to add to that. Um, Man's Tavern. Uh, 1786 decided to send delegates to Man's Tavern to in Annapolis with the intent to brainstorm revisions for the articles. Then we had the Constitution. We had the 1787 Constitutional Convention, where the delegates from 5 different states met in Annapolis with the intentions to take up trade between the states. Representatives sent to the convention drafted a constitution and then attempted to have it ratified. So, and then there was a hesitation until the Bill of Rights. And then, of course, on page 11, you end up going to extra constitutional, which we kind of defined earlier. So the extra constitutional. Oh, so this was interesting. So you ended up talking about it was extra constitutional for previous treaties. Now, this is something out of the 14 years of constitutional study I had never ever heard of. And where you talk about the fact that these treaties that were actually created prior to the ratification of the Constitution were actually incorporated in the Constitution, but they were considered extra constitutional. Does that make sense? Or maybe I'm
Yeah,
just
that's not
remembering it.
quite what I was. That's not quite what I was describing.
Okay.
Okay. What I was trying to describe in the book is that treaty, like the Treaty of Paris, for example.
Right.
The Treaty of Paris handed over, all of the right to claim of the Northwest Territories to the United States of America government.
Mm-hmm.
It handed over the right to that. That treaty agreement it's embedded in the United States Constitution in Article 6 as a previous engagement. Mm-hmm. Just like the Northwest Ordinance as a previous engagement. Mm-hmm. So all of the treaties and previous legislative enactments that were ongoing were embedded in the United States Constitution as previous engagements in Article 6.
So
it's important for people to understand that.
And everybody knows that the Constitution, the pursuance of clause, right? And or the clause, and anything outside of that is obviously, not considered within the federal power. But everybody always forgets after the semicolon, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. So, we might need to understand a little bit more about grammar and punctuation and things like that, which I'm learning myself through all of this stuff, is to be able to understand what entity it's actually talking about. So to summarize what you're saying, this basically says that the treaties that were made previously to this Constitution that was created and had this legislation beforehand all needed to be included under Article 6 as incorporated in the Constitution. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And here's how we can look at it. The Northwest Ordinance was passed in 1787 by the Articles of Confederate Government. 5 months later, all the same people went to start deliberating what to do about how to shore up the articles, right? So we're talking about all the same people, right? Mm-hmm. They're all involved in government. They're all involved in national government, state government. They're all involved. They're all the same people. So you don't have one group of people that created the Northwest Ordinance, another group of people that created the Constitution. No, you don't. They're all the same people. So when they go from one system of government to go deliberate another system of government, what do you think they're going to be talking about? All their previous engagements.
Right.
Okay. So we have to wrap our mind around, what was going on during this time and go, okay, because I've had people say to me, well, Ron, just because it was a previous engagement doesn't mean that it's still applicable. And I'm like, you're not getting the point. You're not understanding what's going on here. Mm-hmm. If it's an ongoing program and all the same people are the ones that created the program, and they want to keep the program because they got to create states out of it, and then they go create a new system of government, they're going to write it into the new system of government.
Well, it's like saying the Articles of Confederation had to be included in the Constitution. I mean, the Articles of Confederation, the difference is the Articles of Confederation was left. It was cut off, terminated. what it suspended, replaced, whatever.
Right.
The treaties that were existing, they were still existing at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, thereby meaning that they had to be incorporated in Article
That's
6.
right.
Okay, good.
That's right.
So we're at 203. So what we should probably do is I should probably mark a line here and say end video 3. And then what I wanted to do is to be able to ask you a few questions for about 5 minutes or so.
Sure.
That's okay. And maybe not. Like I said, I ended up messing up, but so some of these are just random softball questions, but and I don't even know the mindset why I wrote them, so I'd be embarrassed to actually read them to you out loud. Um, but it basically said, can do-gooders navigate the Constitution properly? And what I
Yeah,
mean,
anybody can have it. Good.
right? So, I mean, if do-gooders, in other words, what my point is that you can be as angelic as you want. You could be Jesus Christ if you wanted to be. I mean, you can't be, but I mean, for all intents and purposes,
Right.
you could be that type of character. But if you didn't understand what the Constitution was, it doesn't matter how good you are, right?
I agree with you. I agree. I think in order, there are a lot of people in the United States, besides me and you, a lot of them, tens of thousands in the United States, that all have a take on how they think the United States constitutional system is supposed to operate. All of them, right? We can't all be right when they're in conflict with one another, right? So what we've got to do is do like what we're doing now. We got to have a conversation about what we think that the Constitution means, what it says, what it does. It's how it was implemented historically. We need to have the smartest people rise to the top in this conversation nationally, and then get together and hammer some of these things out. And so we write books, we have videos, we try to have town halls, whatever we can do to try to get the cream to rise to the top, so the smartest people, or at least the people that can navigate the constitutional space with the least amount of restriction.
Right.
Okay, that's what we want.
Mm.
And it's not to say that we're excluding everybody else that can't rise to that level from the conversation. Everybody has a voice, and you have your vote, etc. So, but most people I find don't want to opine at all, and so therefore there's really not much resistance. People are just going to rise to the top. Hopefully, the people at the top that when the cream rises, those people can get together and they can have a conversation. And hopefully, we can do this all before the other people pull the pen on the convention of states,
Well,
because I think that's a really bad idea.
Mark Meckler says we're all James Madisons. What do you say to that?
I wish I was James Madison. That guy was brilliant. Brilliant.
He's
We
got
are
a
not
room of
all James Madison.
he's got a room of people that are ready to throw our Constitution away, and he's calling him James Madison's. When I heard that, I just thought, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, if somebody called me a James Madison, I would just call him an idiot. But anyway, so the next question, and the reason why I'm asking these questions is because I wrote these when I was reading the book. So although we might have discussed this already, these might be questions that new people, new readers, new watchers, new viewers would be asking. Maybe not the way I am, and hopefully I'm conveying this properly. Is the United States and the United States of America the same in Article 6, since the USA is the Confederacy?
That's a difficult question to answer in
Do you
that
understand
format.
it?
I
I
think
didn't.
I do. I think I do. So, okay. So the reason we use the United States of America currently in the modern era is because of the Articles of Confederation. Now, are we the same? No. We are a constitutional republic.
Mhm.
We don't know what the articles were. All right.
Right.
They were just it was a glorified golf club,
First
maybe.
attempt,
I don't
right?
know.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would not conflate. I mean, we call them those two because, and we use them contextually in the same way. In politics, you see it all the time, and in the court system, right? Because let's be honest, there is in the territorial component, there is still the component of the United States of America. But if I get into that, I will lose everyone. So
Right.
it's better just to steer clear of that.
Okay. So, yeah, I think you refer to a phrase called the plan. Is that right? In your book?
Yeah, and the plan is just to move the needle,
Okay.
the federalism needle. Okay, so I count federalism as a sliding scale, and the reason why I do that is because we began as a dual federal system, and we're now operating as a cooperative federal system. So you have dual federal, cooperative federal, right? And so if you look at the way that the Constitution was designed to operate, you can easily see a sliding scale here. Easily. You just got to do a lot of reading to get there.
Right.
But when you
Okay.
see the sliding scale, you're like, oh, okay, well, if you're putting your finger on the needle to try to manipulate the needle one way or another, me and my group, our plan is to move the needle back toward a dual federal model.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Okay. So let's see. One of the questions was with the creation of the National Territorial Government under the Northwest Ordinance. At the time, there were three executives at the time. No, because
Yeah. So yeah,
the League of Friendship under the Articles of Confederation didn't have an executive, right?
it did have an executive. I think they had in a
Oh, it was
president.
the
So,
president
but
of
they didn't.
Congress. That's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
they had a president, but they didn't really say it was a legislative branch, executive branch. They didn't
Right.
really have it all defined that way,
So he
right?
was the
They had a judiciary.
he was presiding over the
Um,
Congress, probably, right?
right. He was just the
Okay.
president of in Congress assembled is what they called it.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. So the one thing is that let's see. If Arthur St. Clair was the governor of the national territorial government overseeing all of the Northwest Territories, what separation was there between the present Constitution and the national government under the Northwest Ordinance? And I think that's in
Ooh,
page 13, so I probably jumped a little bit ahead, but
no,
I
that's
think
good. That's
I
good.
think we already did we already discuss that, or did you not need to elaborate on that?
No, we didn't talk about that boundary condition,
Oh, because
so
it's page 13 and we're only on page 10, so I jumped the gun.
it's okay. Do you want me to answer it?
Sure, if you want, since we asked.
Okay, so we're going to have to look at Arthur St. Clair and the national government as a very, very powerful federal agency. In fact, they're so powerful that they have their own military, and it just so happens to be the United States
America
military.
had a standing military?
Yeah, he had a
Yes, it did.
standing military. Yes, it did. And all the military hardware, and and all the experienced men from all these engagements against the Native Americans and the British. And so this is a powerful system. In fact, this system is the beginning of the military industrial complex. This is where it begins, right? Okay. So the the problem with the articles was that there was no mandated authoritative connection between Arthur St. Clair and the Articles of Government. And they realized that. And they go, well, so in the Constitution, what they did is they put the entire territorial government apparatus under the executive branch so that the executive branch had control over it. And then they to the United States move somebody if they needed to, which they had to do once, I think.
Okay, we lost you again.
Um,
So on that section, so you have to put that in rewind to say it again.
okay, so the governor, which at the time was Arthur St. Clair, he was the first. There was one after him. was under the control of the executive branch, direct control of the executive branch. And of course, the executive branch was heavily, in fact, the governor was supposed to report to the executive branch every month in a report. So there was a tight connection there. And they did that through legislation. And then the governor was picked by the legislature. So the legislature had to go through a process to pick the governor, and then they would appoint the governor, and they could rescind that appointment at will. So that now the constitutional government's got some control over this very powerful military industrial complex system before it ever gets off the ground and turns into something, well, like what we have today, right?
What a monster. What a monster.
Yeah, it's a
Okay,
monster
so
today.
we're at 215. We started at 125, so we probably should probably end this scenario. We did get through 2 pages though. We got through 9 from 9 to 11, but there was a lot to cover there.
Yeah.
I think that people can, that'll be enough for people to digest on, and we'll just realize how long this video series might take. But I hope that everybody enjoyed themselves and found it informative and stuff. Ron, I really appreciate the work that you've done on the book. I really appreciate your willingness to be able to communicate your book in a series of videos. And no matter what, it's better to do it than not do it. So we hope for the
Agreed.
best, and we hope that it'll be in the hands of the right people, and we know that'll happen because it's that important. And nobody ever does anything for nothing. So we're just going to sit back and do what we can and reap the benefits that we know will be coming. So next time we're going to end up jumping out of page 11, and we'll be moving into we'll be moving down the road and trying to advance some pages on the book. And if you're interested in a copy of the book, you can get a digital copy on the history of federal lands in the United States .com. If it's difficult to find, there'll be a link in the description box. If you have any questions for Ron, click on the link. It'll take you to the website. You can fill out your information and ask your question. We will try to answer the questions that we find either on his website or in the comments section of the videos, so that we can have some sort of an interactive component and help people become a little bit more clear on this complex issue. So, Ron, I thank you for your time, and you can go enjoy the rest of your day now. And I guess I'll see you next time.
All right, Tom. Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.